got into college, and did you have a mentor? You went to the Boys and Girls Club, I think?
Yeah, I'm a proud Boys and Girls Club kid. Growing up in Western Massachusetts, I was in a what do you call it, a busing program. It was called METCO in Western Massachusetts, so where it took inner city kids and shipped them off to the burbs to try to integrate the school. And that was an all sorts of crazy experience. But it was my mother's desire. My mother, like when I think of the fact that she was 16 years old, like I could not raise a child in the way that she raised me now. But she had this for like, I want to take my kid out of this school, I want to put him in these schools where he have more opportunities. She actually said, so she went to Western New England College, which is now Western New England University, and she had gone to all black schools, and she talked about the fact that she felt culture shock when she went to Western New England and was one of the only black people in her classes. And so she said she didn't want me to have that same experience. She wanted me to have a more diverse experience. And so I went to that program, and every day after I got out of school, I think one, because she wanted to make sure I had some diverse experience and not just going to the predominantly white schools, but also because she needed some cheap daycare because she was working and going to school and a church secretary. I went to the Boys and Girls Club, Family Center Boys and Girls Club, and I spent every other hour there, and it was amazing for me. It was like this, you know, extra parents, extra aunts, extra uncles, my first jobs, my first opportunities to test my talents, other people pushing me and guiding me, and so, you know, it was a really an incredible experience for me. And you know, when I think of the reason why I do the work that I do today, you know, church certainly had a strong influence on me. My mother was amazing. I think it was those early experiences at the Boys and Girls Club that was very strong for me.
So when you are in a room on a board, was meeting with people in the social sector, do you feel a responsibility to be the black guy?
You can't help but to be the black guy. To be the black guy. It's so funny. I think about my experience in the METCO busing program. Anyone that's a person of color that went to predominantly white schools? Oh, so you'll know this feeling. So once a year in February, you learn about slavery, and you learn about Dr. King and the Civil War. There are about 2 pages in the history book. And the history professor, whoever would start talking the story, and every head in the classroom would turn to me as if I had some sort of expert relationship with Harriet Tubman. And it was the most uncomfortable experience. So it's a horrible position to be in, to where you think like you are carrying the opinions for your diverse, massive ethnic group. But I do feel a responsibility to carry my experiences into the room. And actually, you know, I was pretty young going into some senior positions in philanthropy. And there were times where I felt very insecure. And one of the things that I think helped me to get over that insecurity was realizing that I had a unique voice, was realizing that I had a certain set of experiences, that I understand how community ticked and what brought people together and what drove them apart. And that was something that was missing from the room, and that was something that was very much needed in that room.
Help us feel brave, because there's people like you who we are asking with this program to step into a room of mostly white board members. A lot of them have been board members a really long time. And you're a person of color walking in there with maybe a little bit of experience on a board, but definitely all new. Help them feel brave, that their voice and their opinion, their background makes a difference. I know there's a lot of nonprofits here who do have a pretty diverse board, but oftentimes they're having a hard time plugging into those people and making the best use out of them. So how do we make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have an obligation. If you like, I was talking about the difference between the moral obligation and the economic imperative. You know, let's take the moral obligation about equity out of it and just look at the economic imperative. And so when you're going into these boardrooms and you're talking about a fidelity to the resources that you are trying to distribute in the community, you have to realize that the more diverse the table is, the more that we're thinking about including the people that we're talking about helping in the conversation, you actually have an argument that is as much head as it is heart. And the numbers can back that up. And so you don't have to feel like you're going in there alone just trying to be this, you know, tree-hugging hippie, trying to encourage people to think about diversity, but helping them think about how this will end up making the community better. And the fact that the way that things have been done so far has led us to a place where no one is happy with. And so I think the more you can back it up with data, the more we can throw out statistics that shows when there is diversity in companies, it leads to higher profits. When when we are expanding our talent pool, it leads to more competitiveness. If you're having that problem, think about bringing the facts that help make the case as why diversity, equity, and getting rid of bias is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you touched on that, because it's more than just the moral imperative of making this happen. There are actual efficacies that are at risk here if we don't make this happen. So, and yet, somehow, when I've spoken to some executive directors, some of them have no problem and totally get how to find these people, how to onboard these people, how to make the best use of these people. And then others are just at a loss to where they are or if they exist at all.
Here they are.
So what is it that's missing? And I know that some of these questions, we talked about this before. There's some pretty obvious things that people can do to identify people of color who could really be big participants on your board. But what are some things for our non-people of color friends?
Yeah, let me say three things. You have a marketing and communications background. One is marketing and communications. So the Social Innovation Fund, which I led, sits at the Corporation for National Community Service, which is the federal agency that oversees AmeriCorps. And we had a big problem with diversity in those programs. But one of the things that we had to confront was a lot of the ways that we were talking about it, that we were advertising, the images that we were using, were not diverse. It was not reaching out to communities. We were doing the same. It was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because it had been largely a field dominated by white women, most of our images, most of the people that we were putting out front were white women. And people could not see themselves in this work. It was almost like putting up a sign that says, I don't belong here. So how are we marketing and communicating in such a way that says, we are welcome, you're open? When I was here last year, a young man told a story at the My Brother's Keeper event that he grew up, what's the black side of Austin? East. That he grew up in East Austin. And he had gone to jail in his late teens and got out in his early 20s, and someone told him about UT Austin. He said the first time he stepped foot into the west side of Austin, where I guess UT Austin is, was after he got out of jail. Because when he was growing up, he didn't feel like it was for him. He wasn't supposed to go there. There's not a gate.
What year was this?
This was last year when he shared the story, and this was probably a couple of years. He had actually maybe 4 years because he had just gotten his bachelor's degree. And so, how are we putting images out there that are welcoming and inviting? The other thing is like not only images, but how are we thinking about the real challenges that maybe people of color are experiencing? So I'll give the AmeriCorps example again. For a lot of kids that come from more affluent backgrounds, it's really easy to take a job out of college for $12,000 a year, where mom and dad can supplement your rent and your food. For someone that might be first generation college going, and you just broke the mold, and you got to go take the good job. And so we start talking about housing stipends. And food stipends and the types of things, and helping people understand this is actually a pathway to a better job because it's giving you early experiences. So how are you influencing and creating pathways that makes it easier for those folks?
Does anybody have any questions? Anybody? Raise your hand and just. Chris?
Yes. So I hear you talking a little bit about the moral obligation and the economic. What you would get out of the economic
Benefits?
Benefit as well. Do you see any danger in tying those two? Because on one hand, it makes sense when you're talking about dollars and cents on why you should bring people together. But on the other hand, if that wasn't there, then what would the argument be? So is there a danger in tying those two together in the future?
It's interesting. The president likes to say America's at strongest when we field a full team. And I cannot think of almost any situation where diversity doesn't lead to a net positive benefit for society, not just the community. Welcoming, including, opening up, creating more doors and more opportunities and more pathways. I actually think that people that work in the social sector have to start getting a little bit more smarter on the messages and the language that will bring in the dollars and the resources of folks that may not be thinking with all heart. And I think that's actually been one of our big challenges. We did a lot of work at the Case Foundation and when I launched the Pay for Success program at the Social Innovation Fund in this impact investing space. And we found that there were so many philanthropists who were kind of turned off by traditional philanthropy because there was this real kind of break-off in the way that they did their business work that was about dollars and cents and return on investments. And when they got into philanthropy, it didn't seem that clear. But if we, I really believe if we could tie those two together, it really could bring more opportunity, more people, more dollars into the work that we're doing.
Another question? Brent, yes, sir?
Hi, first off, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of training in terms of understanding racism, understanding classism, and the role of that training in helping an organization or a corporation start to incorporate and bring in diverse leaders.
Yeah, I have to say, it's been hugely important to the work of My Brother's Keeper all over the country, and there are organizations like PolicyLink that are doing this work. Most of our My Brother's Keeper efforts across the country start with some sort of equity and bias training that takes place before they do this work, because they have to, the My Brother's Keeper communities have to take a real look at what the gaps are, what's causing those gaps, and so that work is so hugely important. And it's also, I've seen in philanthropy across the country, and in DC actually, the head of the Washington Grantmakers Association is starting a major training effort for foundations. I mean, you all know that most racism, we were talking about this, is not overt. It's not people using the N-word or burning a cross. It is deep, entrenched, systemic, institutionalized challenges that many of us don't even realize we carry with us. And so having the courage to have the honest conversations, to bring in third parties that are a little disconnected from the work, to start those conversations is hugely, hugely important. I'll tell you, even like on mentoring, so we do a lot of work with mentoring for My Brother's Keeper, and the data shows it doesn't matter for mentoring if you are a black boy and get paired with a white woman or a Latin man, as long as there is training on bias and cultural sensitivity. That is something that is so hugely important so that you're not bringing those personal biases into the situation.
You had a question?
Yeah, I did. I had a quick question about the grassroots organizations versus nonprofit organizations. Do you see where there could possibly be a gap between philanthropy and working with some grassroots organizations? And if so, what's the responsibility that we may have to these grassroots organizations who are doing a lot of things within the community, and so much so reaching to those that are seriously disciplined?
So when you're saying the difference between like the service providers and the philanthropy organization?
Is there a responsibility to that philanthropists may have to grassroots organizations that are maybe don't have the access to go?
So organizations that may become, they're African Americans for African American organizations that are grassroots versus organized philanthropy, the mainstream.
Right,
Yeah.
that have access to
That's a good question.
Yeah, he who controls the purse strings has a whole lot of power and influence. And when I was at the Case Foundation, we launched this campaign called Be Fearless, which was trying to encourage more risk-taking and innovation in the social sector, starting with philanthropy. And the real push behind that was we realized if foundations weren't being fearless, if they weren't willing to take risks, if they weren't willing to try new things, then the organizations that they funded wouldn't go nearly as far at all, because those are the people that they're reporting back into. And so I think, and I've seen this all over the country, you're actually seeing organizations like Kellogg Foundation providing a lot of the money on diversity and inclusion that is then in turn going to these grassroots organizations that are doing the service provision. And so, I think when you go into philanthropy, when you work for a foundation, you have to realize that power dynamic that comes into play, that you, because you control those purse strings, are giving ability and influence and opportunity to the organizations that you're funding. So it matters a whole lot for philanthropy to step up and let nonprofits know that this is something that's valued and expected. One small example I'll give that relates to our My Brother's Keeper work, the Skillman Foundation in Detroit, which is run by an extraordinary woman named Tanya Allen. When she came in, she found that the numbers of boys that were participating in programs of her grantees was diminishing. And so she came in to her organizations and said, if you expect to keep getting grants from the Skillman Foundation, you have to have at least 40% of your kids that you're serving as boys. And that changed the game in Detroit for what was happening with boys of color in Detroit. So it's a strong power dynamic, and we all have to be aware of it. And when we're in these positions of power, to use it.
Yeah, we might have to wrap up.
You tell me how far there.
Well, Austin traffic, it's raining. We should have left an hour ago. Let's have one more question, and then I'm going to end with a question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. But again, welcome, Michael. It's good to have you in Austin. But just to kind of talk a little bit more about your personal story,
Yeah.
I think that's something that is very important to discuss here in Austin, because there's all kinds of opportunity around us, but for some reason there's like, I call it Austin is connected, but we're disconnected. So if you can just talk a little bit more about the importance of giving opportunity, because your story is really amazing and we can inspire other people, but we have other Michael Smiths right around us, but they're not given opportunity to be a Michael Smith.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I went back to the Corporation for National Service recently to talk at a Black History Month program. And there's an older brother that works at the Corporation for National Service who would always like hang out by my office and give me words of wisdom and advice. And he'd have an article for me. All right, young brother, I just want to make sure you knew about this. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. And so when I came back, I saw him looking at me the whole time. I'm like, oh no, what have I done? I've done something wrong. And so he pulls me aside after it was over. He said, you did a good job. I got a bone for pick with you. You didn't leave a good bench here. And I was like, but our team was small. We were like 10 to 12 people. And he was right. I didn't. I worked really hard to try to make sure we had diverse candidates. When I left, I think we had one male of color on our team. And a few months later, there were no men of color on that team. And it was a rude awakening for me. And I'm out here talking about diversity all the time. It's a little harder in the federal government with hiring because of the point system and all that stuff. But I think when we are in positions of power, we've got to work harder to make sure we're preparing a bench. Not only in our current teams, but it goes back down to like kids. How are we raising kids that have opportunities to have that first internship experience at a foundation so they can see that that's something they would want to do? How are we giving them that opportunity to work at a nonprofit so they're seeing that's, how are we, providing grants and scholarships to go work in a philanthropy program, to take a philanthropy course at a university? And so this isn't just about making sure that we can, like the mayor said, go to the same 20 people that we're already providing. That's layer one. Layer two is taking the action, the real action, to advertise on Black radio, to be in the local community newspapers, to go talk at the church and go be where the people are, to get the right people on the bus. But that third, and the most critical layer, where I think we're actually failing a bit as a country on so many different things, is making sure that we're preparing the youngest generation to be the next generation of servant leaders in this country, because we have a real problem with that. And so that's something that I think it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day that we forget about it. If you look at corporate America, they spend a whole lot of time on talent development, and they spend a whole lot of money on talent development. And I would say we probably spend 0.05% of what they spend. And we've got to start getting serious about that in philanthropy and in the social sector if we want to make sure our future organizations look like our future country.
So we're going to double down. We're going to follow all your advice. In a year, you're going to come back. It's going to be as diverse as. Is that what it takes? Do you think it'll happen that quickly?
I think it can happen quickly. I mean, look, these are challenging. With My Brother's Keeper, people ask about, what are our success measures? We're dealing with historically entrenched issues that have been in the making for hundreds of years. But I saw that Compton reduced its homicides by 50% a year. I saw that Philadelphia reduced in-school arrests by 54%. I saw that there is now an incubator for minority entrepreneurs in Detroit and New Orleans that wasn't there a year ago. And so I really do believe when we put our minds to it, when we act with that sense of urgency that Dr. King reminded us of, that we can see some changes. When we put our elbow to the grindstone in this country, we see some amazing results once we're committed to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's do this.